Hi everyone. So here's an interesting report about uh, about Ethiopia. It's interesting not because it contains anything that would come as a news or surprise to any one of you, because those of you who know anything about the war on Tigray for the past 3 years would know about the how atrocious and how devastating it was for Tigray. So nothing in terms of the facts that they report, but that the Western establishment have started to admit how disastrous the war on Tigray was. So it's the kind of report that you wouldn't expect from any mainstream media or Western establishment. But this is a report from PRIO. So PRIO is Peace Research Institute Oslo, and they conduct research on the conditions for peaceful relations between states, groups, and people. But anyways, this comes from an institute that, from what I could understand, has some sort of relationship with the institute that gave Abiy Ahmed the Nobel Peace Prize. So this is a report coming from 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 an interesting institute in that sense, and the report is about it concerns 2022, and the report simply says that Ethiopia was the deadliest country in 2022. Again, not a surprise. I think every one of you, will know that Ethiopia, of course, was the deadliest country, not just in 2022, but also in 2021 and maybe in 2020 as well, because the war on Tigray, Ethiopia and Eritrea invaded Tigray in 2020, in November of 2020, and the two countries started killing and murdering and shelling and destroying Tigrayans with wanton abandon from day one. So no surprise that Ethiopia was the deadliest country for the past 3 years. But the scope of the report is 2022, and it says that in 2022 Ethiopia was the deadliest country with, according to this report, with 100,000 fatalities. But again, we know that the number of Tigrayans killed is way more than 100,000 people. Again, it's just in 2022, but I think we know that the number is close to 1 million totally over 3 years. So maybe, roughly in 2022, it would be around, I would say, 300,000 to 400,000 people in Tigray. Most of them, the vast majority of them, killed by Ethiopia and Eritrea using all sorts of barbaric mechanisms, from starvation to indiscriminate shelling to indiscriminate drone strikes and all other mechanisms. But you wouldn't expect, again, Western media outlets or establishments to report the exact number of fatalities or casualties in Ethiopia, because the narrative that the Western world wants to push is Russia is the most, or the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is the most deadly. That is the preferred narrative that they want to push for understandable geopolitical purposes, because let's face it, who cares about what happens in a far-flung country now in Africa? So they were never going to water down what is happening in Ukraine by saying that there is actually a more deadly conflict in Africa. That was never going to happen. But I thought this was a good start, that they are starting to admit that actually the war on Tigray was the most deadly. And maybe in time, who knows, they might start to admit that Western institutions, from the Nobel Prize institutes to other bodies, enabled it, because with all the leverage that the Western establishment has over Ethiopia, they had the power to stop the war on Tigray and to prevent the hundreds of thousands of deaths in Tigray. They had the power, and they knew that if they wanted, they could have stopped it. But of course, they didn't. They sat idly by as Abiy and Eritrea and Isaias butchered Tigrayan people with impunity, and it's not nothing that they have started admitting, conceding that it was the most deadly conflict, and maybe who knows, this is the beginning towards providing some sort of justice, because justice starts from telling the story as it is, from not pretending that it was just a minor conflict in East Africa, and now that the Tigrayan and Ethiopian governments have signed a peace agreement, we could just move on as though nothing had happened. So I thought I would just because I was surprised in a way, that the what was the name, the Peace Research Institute, was compelled enough to admit that Ethiopia was the deadliest country in 2022, and so yeah, I don't have much to say except what I've already said, and bye bye.